Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb Riff. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm the producer with a $71 trillion truth, and I'm also a political organizer and activist for a platform behind me called the Clean New Deal that I am tired. I'm trying, I was about to say tirelessly trying, but trying with an extra dosage of it's got to happen now to get this information into millions of people's minds to understand what's going on, what's at stake, what happens if we don't fix this problem, but how we must fix this problem now, and that there is no time to waste because the time is now. It's a paradox. There is no time to ramp up to try to, you know, build a long, slow civil rights like movement that's going to be able to get the people power behind it necessary to destroy this insanity of corruption that is destroying us all. And I'm particularly, shall we say, motivated given yesterday and really everything that's led up today. I think, honestly, this is like my 777th Truth Bomb Riff, which is part lecture, part sermon, part self help therapy, but more importantly, part me trying to get you information that I have as the producer that put all of this stuff together that didn't get widespread release and attention to the point where tens of millions of people understood what happened to this country to create the situation we're in. Okay. And yesterday was particularly absurd. I mean, all things more and more revelations and debacles of all things Iran on the front page of the New York Times today. Um, Saudi is encouraging Trump to continue the campaign. A lot of people are thinking this is a wag the dog situation, that Israel leveraged Trump and that it had to happen now for whatever reason. It's been on the books forever. I still don't exactly understand the entirety of the situation, given the volatility in global oil markets and more that I could go on explaining. And I have many, many other times. I have many theories on it. But what matters in lieu of us approaching No Kings, for example, this Saturday, March 28th, when millions of us are going to come to the streets and raise our signs and actually interact and show our support that we don't support this candidate, we don't support the Trump administration and everything that's happened to it. And for those of you who know, I've been a part of the No Kings rally going back to 50501 at the beginning of last spring. I've spoken at two of them. I've seen firsthand exactly what it's all about, and it's pretty inspiring and amazing. And I'll tell you, all of the signs tell the story. Everybody creates a sign that says exactly what their issue is. But collectively, and if you understand who Ezra Levin and his lovely wife, Leah Greenberg, are, and what they do and what the Indivisible movement is all about, that's spawned the No Kings rally after the 50501 protest initially kicked it off, all things considered, and Rachel Maddow's complete backing. They don't have a unifying plan. It's just ultimately we're anti-MAGA. And I'm here to tell you that's collectively the Democratic DNC slash position, that the Democrats are all things not Trump. And so they're banking on the fact that things are so out of control that in the midterms, that everybody's going to be so disgusted that they're going to show up if we have free and fair elections that aren't somehow sabotaged by what it appears to be absolutely clear, given all things, what's happening in the Supreme Court and the SAVE Act and martial law and ICE and all of the rest of it, that they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan concurrent or requisite the corruption that we're in the midst of that spawned from Project 2025. As I've mentioned many, many, many times, this is a wag the dog situation. Trump is a mastermind of nothing. He's an idiot. He's a transactional con artist, RICO, pedo protection racket pig that is basically there to enrich himself so that this fossil fuel financial, military, industrial intelligence juggernaut that's really been in the shadows puppeteering the whole thing, which many people refer to as the deep state, but it's eyes wide shut. It's been in front of our face for literally decades. Throughout most of the Cold War, 80s, 90s, what we're in the midst of post 9/11, and everything that you know reveals, not to mention It's all right in front of our face, and mostly in the 37-mile wide Strait of Hormuz, where 1/5 of the world's oil supply is affecting global markets. What's the remedy to endless war for oil? What's the remedy for financial terrorism? What's the remedy for an environmental collapse? What's the remedy for a lawless administration filled with sycophants to the point that you've got Corey Lewandowski and you know I don't know why I keep going into Noemi. It's Christy Noems. It's so funny how I get her name kind of confagled in my mind. But yeah, she got fired. But before she got fired, she was doing the Mile High Club with Corey while they're apparently stealing, looting $200 million on contracts, while at the same time, having Americans shot or thrown into gulags. This America is so out of control and so beyond the pale of anything of our worst nightmares that I still feel like most Americans are overwhelmed. They feel that somebody, some way, is going to find a path through this, but they don't know exactly how. But they've got to go show their colors, and they got to be a part of something until something emerges, or they're just on the sidelines, kind of feeling it out and figuring it out. But yet, at the same time, many more of us, millions of us, tens of millions of us, have had our heads in the sand for so long that we don't have a clue of how power works. We don't have a clue who Russell Vogt is. We don't have a clue who the Heritage Foundation is. We don't have a clue who the Billionaire Class is until we put a name on it that Ro Khanna came up with, which was genius, the Epstein Class. And yeah, thank God it's not just Jews, but it's overwhelmingly percentage a lot of Jews that are in the mix of this at the highest levels, particularly when you think of this new media mergers and acquisition scenario with Larry Ellison and all of what that enamors. And, I could go on and on and on. But my point being is that the Epstein class is the billionaire class, and it is made up not just of Americans, but European and global oligarchs that are all about capital flows and this convergence of ultimately what's backstopped by what I reveal that nobody else does. And that's the most important part of Patrick Lovell being the producer with a $71 trillion truth, because it just re-engineers everything that has been destroyed over the course of the last 30 years, starting with regulations, common sense regulations, particularly in the financial industry, that we learned as far back as the Great Depression, that 99% of the American public still doesn't understand and still doesn't understand how money works, which is insane. I think a large percentage of Americans don't understand that Congress it has the power of the purse. And Congress, as hopefully most of you know, gets pollinated by people who we vote for through the process that starts with the primaries, where candidates give us their platforms and everything else, and they conjecture to get our votes to move forward, to be a part of something that hopefully is broader, to be able to answer all of these elements that we're in the midst of. But there's nothing comprehensively that rises to the moment except for what's behind me, the Clean New Deal. Nothing. And I'm going to demonstrate that briefly because last night I was completely triggered because in my backyard where I live, Rachel Maddow had an interview with a candidate from the first district here in Utah, where this guy, Nate Bluen, who I actually have met with, and I know who he is. And now I understand what his platform is more than I did before, because I think he recently, did a version, whatever, of his website that I hadn't seen before that really brings this all together, and why I have to get your attention about this and what this all means, particularly in light of what we're doing, in terms of our effort by way of No Kings. Okay. You have to understand, first and foremost, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm a muckraking journalist. I studied political science in college and journalism, and I've been in the business for a long time. I went independent after the 2008 great financial crisis and ultimately did a series of films that led me to these revelations that the entire strata of government and media has hidden from all of us. And we all know that to be true now because of the Epstein files. Yesterday, for example, I read an article on the front page of the New York Times led by someone who I've interacted with many times. Many of you who have seen these know I have a relationship with a gentleman by the name of David Enrich, the Deputy Investigation Director for the New York Times. And I recently, a month ago, interviewed him regarding all things JP Morgan Chase as it related to Jeffrey Epstein. Yesterday, they did another bombshell revelation on Leon Black, which is a giant hedge funder that when you understand all of that information, you understand that all of these idiots out there that say, release the Epstein files, release the Epstein files, release the Epstein files, and that's all they can do. A war in Iraq or Iran, pardon me, that's a faux pas. That's a distraction. No, release the Epstein files. Meanwhile, there's been so much released in the Epstein files that, of course, it led to the arrest of Prince Andrew. It led to, developments such as I think the senior leadership of Norway and the Crown and everybody involved with the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, which is the largest in the world, have had to resign, and all sorts of implications along those lines. Of course, we've seen all these billionaires in the United States back away from the limelight. J.B. Pritzker's brother, who was CEO of, I guess, Hyatt Hotels and their collective companies, yeah, he rescinded into, what, obscurity, being a 76-year-old billionaire. I mean, that's not justice by any means, and neither, depending on what his situation was. And, the list goes on. I mean, more importantly, Larry Summers, the former treasurer for President Clinton, Secretary of the Treasury, and then, of course, he was president of Harvard and everything that entails. Yeah, he resigned. Okay, big fucking deal, considering all of the information that we've had. And we've seen some monumental information in the Epstein files already, enough to elicit a massive investigation, which is, of course, kind of happening in fits and starts with Ro Khanna and Massey and the Epstein Transparency Act, and bringing in, some of these high-powered players, like, of course, former President Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. And as I've said on the record before, both demonstrated an absolute mastery of that question period, and they showed their legal acumen that far exceeded the people asking them the questions from the Republican side of the House. But meanwhile, somebody like me who voted for Clinton back in the day, and of course was supporting Hillary against Trump because we have basically a two-party monopoly, and there was no other choice. And so, yeah, I was definitely for Hillary, and then of course everything collapsed. And what I'm here to say is that there's no way in hell that Bill Clinton and Hillary Rodham Clinton don't know who Epstein was, long before all of this other shit took place. And the people that asked questions had no idea what questions to ask, first and foremost. I'm not saying they're singularly responsible. I'm not saying that Hillary Clinton had anything to do with it. I'm not saying that Bill interacted in a way that, we've seen revealed in these Epstein files that are sickening, right? But that's not to say he wasn't involved to a degree. He obviously admitted he was on the island and massage tables and yada, yada, yada. But to think that he didn't know who Epstein was, given the Clinton Foundation and everything that goes with it, is absurd. Outside of financing, drugs for third world nations, AIDS vaccinations and polio vaccinations and all those types of things that are like, billionaire laundering, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Clinton, there's no way in hell he didn't know. Not to mention, I think it was on the Lolita Express like 17 times, and they used it to go on these sabbaticals to Africa, whatever. Okay, so that strains credulity, first and foremost. Not to mention, I mentioned a couple of truth bombs ago, the most important person in the orbit of Clintons that were super simpatico with Epstein was a guy by the name of William Burns, who was like assistant director of the Secretary of State, during that time period. And I think Obama's time period, and during Biden's time period was director of the CIA. Yeah, he was seeking advice on job placement with Epstein after his assignment at the CIA. What the serious fuck? Okay, not to mention the fact that the questions with Les Wexner, his wife was director of mergers and acquisitions for one of the largest law firms in the United States, and she didn't know where the money was. Why wasn't she subpoenaed, or where it went and what it was all about? All of this stuff is absolutely ridiculous. And I could go on and on and on, but most importantly, starting with Leon Black, right? There's this orchestration of intelligence, of geopolitics, of technology, of academia, of every other thing under the sun of influence that this Epstein class was in on and fomented together, that there was eyes wide shut and there was definitely some sort of blackmail involved. And to what extent and how that plays out with Trump is so unbelievably obvious. But 2 weeks ago, we had Senator Sheldon Whitehouse on the floor of the House, basically giving a dissertation on Jeffrey Epstein's relationship with, of all things, Russia. It came to my attention recently that Jeffrey Epstein may have been managing some portion of Vladimir Putin's estate. To what ends? I do know all of the information about liquid capital and Bear Stearns and all things what happened with Jeffrey Epstein, thanks to Steve Bannon when he was in jail on the great financial crisis, when he made two calls, one to Jimmy Kane, who was the CEO of Bear Stearns, and of course the other one was to Jess Staley at JP Morgan Chase. And yeah, that's like what? Especially when you know who I am, Patrick Lovell, the producer with the $71 trillion truth, because that's a direct correlation to what I just told you, which led to what was known as Maiden Lane, which bailed out all of Epstein's scenario because of what took place with this juggernaut of, Paulson and Bernanke and Geithner basically circling the wagons and working a backdoor with the Fed to bail out a lot of the shareholders for Bear Stearns. So the whole system was supposedly not going to melt down. And that was the first effort that would then lead to the illegal use of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 that would pump tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the Epstein class, affectionately known as, right? To do what? To continue wars on oil, to deliver the scenario of just perversion and inversion and perverse above the law, scenarios where literally children were raped, among other things. Okay. We don't have a full composite of what Epstein is. It's getting closer and closer, but Massey and Ro Khanna are not going to be able to get the full story. The fact that we've gotten this much is insane. The fact that they've subpoenaed and they're doing this dance with, Attorney General Pam Bondi, that's another aside, and she's lied and she's perjured herself before anyway. And so is Kash Patel, and I could go on. I mean, this whole thing is a shit show. Meanwhile, we've got ICE in airports now because of the whole funding situation. Democrats are like, no, we'll fund TSA, but we're not funding ICE. So Trump sends in ICE, and then we see pictures yesterday at SFO where, more of the same of ICE, right? This on top of the fact that we've got, literal detention camps, i.e., gulags, being built all over the United States, a lot of it secretly. And that's what led me to the point that I started with Rachel Maddow, that led to this guy, Nate Bluen, where they had this interview last night, which was interesting because Nate has been on the front lines of really significant protests to get ICE facilities. And she's asking him these questions like regarding information that had no follow-up, and I'll give you a demonstration of what that means, okay? So, and you can always tell, here's the tell, when things are somewhat scripted and politicians are speaking, there's a slight pause where they're answering questions, where they're formulating their answer based on their strategy of how to approach what that interview is. That is basically, I want to just say promotional, AKA propaganda, if you will, if you want to take it to the nth degree, to kind of maintain a specific credibility in the games of politics so that a guy like Nate running for Congress has national appeal based on something that everybody that's not MAGA is up in arms about, with ICE detention facilities and everything that means. And it becomes this kind of, a political hot button, right? As it should, quite frankly. And I thought Nate answered the questions pretty well, but he gets to this point where he says something along the lines of, and this was the whole, sequencing of the whole thing, where, and in fact, I'm going to find the interview and I'll put it down in the link below so you can kind of juxtapose it to what I'm revealing to you. But the question was, okay, so ICE is buying detention centers for exorbitant amounts of money, far in excess of what the actual value of the properties are. So let's say in this case, in Salt Lake City, there's this large, warehouse complex that's being bought for apparently $50 million over market. So I don't know what the total cost of the facility was, but $50 million over market. Okay. So they're talking about these questions in a sort of obscure Like, okay, we're going to tell you that it's over $50 million, which gets you the hair on the back of your neck. Like, what, somebody's pocketing $50 million over market to build this warehouse facility, who's a private owner, obviously, to facilitate a warehouse that the state and the city and everybody else is against. And it's just kind of working around states' rights and all of these types of juggernauts of federal initiatives, bulldozing states, which is ironic, all things Republicans, if you know anything about Republicans. But again, the key point here is that it's $50 million overvalued. Okay. First of all, how do they know that? Who did the comparables? Who's the purchaser? What is their connection to MAGA? What is their connection to Trump? These are all legit forensic questions that should be identified and answered for so many reasons, okay? Because the details matter. Now, I'll tell you, the state of Utah, most people affiliate with this sort of LDS Mormon kind of strange thing that they don't know unless, of course, they ski or they go to parks. That's their thing, which millions and millions of people do. And they know Utah to be this glorious state of just nature and scenic brilliance and skiing, some of the best in the world, and many, many other things. Now, Utah has become probably one of the premier ski destinations in North America, if not the world, but particularly for heavy duty real estate. Ski in, ski out, magnificent estates on the mountain, that rival anything in the world. Okay. Aspen, Jackson Hole, Sun Valley, better infrastructure, better product, better access to, major terminals. Salt Lake City is a serious city now. It may as well be Austin, Texas, but with the Wasatch Front, it's got a lot to offer. Okay. And there are more very, very rich people here than have ever been here before. And quite frankly, many people who roll a lot of wealth into real estate. The thing about real estate post 2008 was that the Federal Reserve and the government and tax policy and everything else encourages wealthy people to put their money into stocks and real estate. That's where these assets maintain value. And many of you have heard you may have heard of private equity and hedge funds and too big to fail in some of the other aspects of the financial industry, but you probably heard of asset managers over the course of the last 10, 15 years when we started to really fully understand apparatuses like BlackRock or Blackstone, for example. Okay, two of the nation's largest and the biggest in the world by magnitudes. Okay, a lot of these outfits are equipped to purchase real estate. Okay. So that's one side of the house in Utah, to the point about Nate blowing in $50 million over market and everything else. Now, beyond that, there was a well known senator from Massachusetts who has ties to Utah, who was also in private equity. Uh, you know, um, uh, Senator, it's so funny because I've seen him in the airport many times and I'm laughing my ass off. Um, the uh, I'm talking, of course, about Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was the CEO of Bain Capital, one of the largest private equity companies in the world, responsible for destroying a lot of companies. Toys R Us come to mind as being probably the most prominent. There's a way private equity works, and he was governor of Massachusetts, and his father was a very famous, Michigan governor, also CEO, I believe, of General Motors and that sort of thing. So, and he went to Harvard and everything else. And then Mitt Romney comes back as a senator. And in that time period, really going back to right after the financial crisis, we saw an amazing array, constellation of the most powerful investment companies, financial companies in the world, the largest hedge funds, Goldman Sachs. I could go on, that basically have gotten an enormous footprint in a state that seems relatively obscure to most people. I think a lot of people are more familiar with the billionaires in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and of course Sun Valley. That's always been there, but not so aware of what's happening in the state of Utah, which is of course their neighbor, right? What's happening in the state of Utah, and this goes with all things the largest financial companies in the world, the largest technology companies in the world. So many years ago, there was a big uh, uh, NSA, National Security Administration listening facility that was built in this place in the West Desert called Bluffdale that brought in enormous resources to build this giant facility, right? That brought in all of the big tech companies that have now led to Meta, Microsoft, all things Apple, in whatever abbreviation under the sun, including, I would imagine, elements of Palantir and who I don't know that for sure, but I would imagine. So we have an area down, and in technology has always been big in the state of Utah, down in the Provo area, affiliated with BYU. There was some major companies that came out of their incubators and their think tanks since the 80s on. WordPerfect comes to mind. So does a couple of others that are huge, worldwide names. But they've established what's known as Silicon Slopes, which is kind of an offshoot of Silicon Valley. And so a lot of the huge tech companies are here too that are involved with the military industrial complex. So you've got the big money here that's also very influential in politics, and it's absurd from a standpoint that, for the last many years, many of you out there know who Senator Mike Lee is because the guy's so guffaw and outrageous and this, that, and the other as it relates to all things MAGA. But yeah, he's like this with Elon Musk, for example, okay? And whatever that means. And I know that there's an incubator state scenario where there's all sorts of new deregulation with open lands, with mineral development, with all things technology, of course, and of course, finance, like I said. So basically, all the big characters that we talk about in the billionaire stratagem, I should say, are here, or at least nodes of their operations are, okay? Which leads me back to that question. Okay, well, who's paying over $50 million more than market value? Wouldn't you like to know if that's Peter Thiel? Wouldn't you like to know if that's somebody associated with Goldman Sachs? Wouldn't you like to know if that's somebody associated, for example, with Elon Musk? I would, among others. But let me share my screen because I want to show you and I want to demonstrate how this works in politics, okay? So, for example, Nate Bluin's a good guy, and is a young guy. And I met with him, and then I was going to talk to him more about the Clean New Deal and the $71 trillion truth. But he got a little bit kind of clamped up about 2 months ago when we first started to talk. And then he asked me for some favors that I wasn't willing to do unless, he was willing to meet with me on these so we could flush it out, which he got a little bit loosey-goosey on. But I just discovered his website a couple of days ago. And I was going through this format as it relates to the Clean New Deal, also in context of the question that I just asked. What's the $50 million about over market value? Okay. A lot can be discerned from knowing that information first and foremost. But moving into his campaign here, his issues are build an economy that works for everyone, enact Medicare for all. Okay, fantastic. So he's going to support that on a federal level. Good for you, Nate, in Congress, right? Tax the billionaires. Okay, that's great. Here's some great ideas. A billionaire could spend $10,000 a day for 273 years and still not run out of money. We need to comprehensively reform the tax system so it benefits working people to ensure the top 1%. And large corporations pay their fair share. The Senate and the state Senate, I introduced legislation that would impose a 1% additional tax on Utahns making over $1 million a year while making earned income tax credit refundable, raising $150 million for Utah schools and returning $65 million to working families every year. Sounds good, right? Except you certainly don't have the numbers in the Utah state legislature, and it seems it's yet to. We'll see if it's resolved in Congress first and foremost. Okay, but relatively kind of obscure. I mean, there's some details, but not a lot. Just really good points for people who are progressive or Democrat and all things anti-MAGA. Right? Take power back from Wall Street and tech excesses. You can read through that, AI driven, but everything else. Okay, agree with all of that. And, but still it's relatively obscure because it doesn't talk about the details. It's more platitudes than anything else. Protect our freedoms and empowering working people, support affordable public college and trade school, strengthen public K-12 education, ensure affordable housing and protect renters and homeowners, expand child tax credits, housing as a human right, secure a living wage, protect and expand Social Security, honor our promises to veterans, cannabis policy reform, a citizen-focused approach to the Rio Grande Plan, which is local, tackle gun violence and the health crisis. protect the environment, preserve public lands, pass the Green New Deal, which is, not detailed, modernize the grid to reduce energy costs and emissions, restore and protect democracy, take corporate money out of politics, reform the criminal justice system, promote transparency in government with action, end congressional stock trading, fight for national gerrymandering reform, protect equitable access to the ballot. Okay, all um, issues that I support, but there's a catch. First of all, as I'm reading through it, I'm like, okay, this sounds awfully familiar. I wonder who might support him on a national front. And I'm thinking to myself, this sounds exactly like Zoran Mandani's, platform. And oh yeah, who do I think was probably centrally influential on how a lot of that transformed, particularly because Zoran is in his mid 30s as well. If I neglected to mention, Nate Bluin is like 36 years old. So, I'm thinking to myself, God, this sounds a lot like Bernie Sanders. And all of a sudden, I go into endorsements, and there he is. Okay, Bernie Sanders and Pramil, Jayapal, and so on and so forth. And a lot of these people I like. Okay, but as a producer and a filmmaker, I put at the end of my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, and I'll put a link to that below as well. Bernie Sanders making an incredibly powerful and compelling and intriguing speech on the floor of the House back in 2011. That was after the great financial crisis and all things the Occupy Wall Street movement, and that's when I first discovered Bernie. And I put it at the end of my film because I was like, wow, he just summarizes everything that I've been laying out in this film pretty much, right? Well, as it turns out, I did have some questions about the details because it all felt like platitudes. And I have witnessed Bernie for now over a decade and a half, basically, say the same thing, the exact same thing. And what's the problem with that? Well, because if you don't identify the corruption, you have absolutely no idea how to fix the problem. Imagine sending an electrician to a house that is only, I don't know, equipped with like a level one understanding. Maybe he's a what do they call it when you're kind of going through your routines and you work with somebody who you're like hip pocketed to somebody who's a professional, and you learn the ins and outs of all things, what you've got to deal with all of the different types of problems that you might you know basically meet in the course of your operations and everything else. And it takes you years. It's like an apprenticeship, is what I'm saying. And it takes you years and years and years to get to the level of understanding. Oh, this is how we got to fix the problem. And see what's going on with guys like Nate, and I see it popping up all over the country. Okay, and this is part and parcel to what we're going to see build after No Kings, which doesn't say anything specific, as I've laid out before, about what's going to happen moving forward. Meanwhile, those of us who understand the Democratic Party, you still see the senior leadership and the DNC who screwed Bernie over for I don't know how many times now, at least three, right? Where they literally sabotaged Bernie in so many ways, and Warren played a role in that in 2020, or was it 2024? It was 2020. It was 2024 too, but 2020 was primarily the deal because of the whole Biden Harris situation, which is part of this whole thing as well, right? See, the conundrum is that the multinationals and the legal sort of billionaires, there's the legal category, there's the medical category, there's pharmaceutical, this, that, and the other, that tend to vote Democratic, okay? Because all of these parties, both parties, have to raise billions of dollars to run candidates, okay? And that's what they do. And then they want to build platitudes and a platform that's like, okay, this is who we are. This is what the problems are. This is how we're going to rectify the problems. And this is why you're going to vote for us. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is the end of the line. MAGA is the end of the line. The Democrats, because of their failure, particularly to deal with what it is that I revealed that gives us the $71 trillion truth, that gave Wall Street tens of trillions of dollars illegally to buy the system, to basically be the man behind the curtain, that ultimately Nate Bluin doesn't know how to ask those questions, obviously, when he's put on the spot with Rachel Maddow. And that was kind of an open-ended question. She wasn't interested in who was behind it because she didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. She just wanted to make the point that they're paying $50 million over market for ICE, which means the American taxpayers, through the big, beautiful bill, are paying for that, right? So they want to create outrage. They want to be like, okay, anything but that, which I understand, okay? But at the same time, we're at a level now because of Project 2025 and all the Heritage Foundation and the Kochs and the Mercers and the Adelsons and everything that's playing out right now in this war in Iran as well, Saudi Arabia, Putin, everything that's this sum total of the last 4 decades, okay? A guy who's 36 years old literally grew up the whole time and doesn't understand what created all of it that's now. He doesn't understand junk bonds, doesn't understand the savings and loan crisis, doesn't understand what happened with the tech bubble, doesn't understand what happened with Enron and WorldCom. All of those things are like, to somebody who's like 36, literally like ancient history. I mean, that's like when they were children. They don't have anything. They have no knowledge of this stuff. Meanwhile, what we're in the midst of is exactly what played out the whole time. Why? Because of the details that I revealed to you, because of deregulation, desupervision, decriminalization that led to what? 71 trillion on the low end being provided to this Epstein class illegally as they're literally destroying the world. Okay? So how are you going to fix all of these things in the affordability crisis if you don't understand, for example, appraisal fraud? Which brings me back to the $50 million overvaluation. Why would the government pay $50 million over market value? To whom? Is that important? You bet your ass it is. Because A, it's payola. B, it's how you get the other people in power to make sure you don't get Medicare for all, to make sure that you don't get all of these lovely platitudes that you're promising that you're going to deliver. How are you going to fix the tumor of corruption if you don't have the chemotherapy, the chemo of truth? You can't. That's what I'm telling you. That's what I'm telling every candidate around the country. What I'm trying to do is to get this information that took me 14 years and millions of dollars and thousands of hours to do that the entire government couldn't do because they were co-opted and hijacked by the Epstein class. And I've got the frickin' details. So, in comparison to what Nate Bluin's platform is suggesting, right? He doesn't know the details of who did what, when, and how, and he can't say declaratively they stole $71 trillion to be in a situation to pay $50 million over market value, for example. And why wouldn't Rachel Maddow tell us that story? Well, Rachel Maddow has been basically a shill for the Democratic Party ever since she got, assigned however many years ago, over a decade ago. She's probably been at MSNBC/MS now, well, at least since the 2008 crisis. So I think we're talking about 14, 15 years, right? While she was sitting in the catbird seat, basically delivering propaganda night in, night out, sometimes her stuff is absolutely, perfect, but she cherry picks in a political Machiavellian way that got to the point where she and Lawrence O'Donnell, for example, both of whom I appreciate, and I watch Lawrence every night, and I love Lawrence. And what I say about Lawrence is every Democrat should speak about Trump the exact way that Lawrence does, and if they don't, they're not worth your vote. They should go to literally classes given by, or just watch all of his shows and speak in that lexicon about how stupid and disgusting and defiling and grotesque and lawless and everything that goes with it under the sun about Trump. That's speaking truth. But I always find it interesting and hilarious that, after these huge buildups that get you outraged when you watch Lawrence O'Donnell, then he'll come in with Hakeem Jeffries, who sounds like mayonnaise to me. And it's like, okay, that's the Democrats. And, as far as, Kamala Harris goes, and Biden, for example, as part of that, establishment and the DNC and the revolving door and everything that this is our system and it has been for 50 years, there was a time where they were talking about the prosecutor as the felon. But the prosecutor never brought the case against the felon Trump because then she would have to reveal all of the stuff that she played ball with. That's tied to appraisal fraud and all things the 2008 great financial crisis that led to $71 trillion going to Wall Street to float the system when they were involved with the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world. And I wasn't the only one paying attention. So was MBS, So was everybody like Netanyahu. So was Putin. The list goes on. Every oligarchic class, everybody that's involved with power structure and geopolitics in the ways of the world and commodities and yada yada yada. Yeah, they all have been watching the same thing I have. And I think a lot of them have been watching my work, by the way. I certainly know Steve Bannon has. But to get to the point, what Nate Bluins is not saying is he's telling everybody what Bernie and AOC did on the anti-oligarchy tour, what Bernie's been doing for the last 13 years without the details that have led nowhere. What I'm providing you is the black box of truth that makes everything else clear. You want a renewable energy paradigm. You want budgeting for education and science to restore NOAA, to restore us to this legal construct where everybody who invests has a really degree of certainty that everything that's in portfolios or prospectus is exactly what they're supposed to be, and that if they're not, that they would be held accountable from the SEC and so on and so forth. A country and a system that actually has credibility and works, as opposed to a death spiral led by this clown president and this cabinet of sycophants and freaks that would do something like Kristi Noem and Lewandowski did, like I said at the outset here, right? Look, people, there is no time. One way or the other, I think we're facing down the gauntlet of martial law. I think they're going to try to steal the election. I think they're going to do everything that it takes to continue from J6 forward, that they've determined that they've gone this far. They're not giving up. Who's they? The MAGA billionaire marriage, okay? Which is, quite frankly, the apocalypse, as far as I'm concerned. Ironically, you know anything about the Armageddon or the story of the rapture? What's the idea? It's that the world is evil. It's led by liars. Everybody's a liar. Everything is Satan, Satan in the darkness, yada, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, because I guess what? The Jews have control of the Holy Land, that Jesus has the impetus to come back. And then the idea is that there's going to be 1,000 years of peace because, the good will overcome evil. But ironically, they're all pimps, whores, junkies, maggots, liars to the nth degree, that the religious right are just as deviant and connish as anybody else, especially the mega churches and everybody else. And they've just rallied millions of idiots that know nothing about the system, but they certainly know their culture and they stand together, right? And on the progressive or the Democratic side or the left, as it were, it's a big tent, a lot of different people, probably collectively much more in number than, of course, the white supremacist class of the MAGA zombie apocalypse, but at the same time, not on the same page completely. Everybody's got different this, that, and the other trans, things that are, important to many people, but they're not important to the economic sort of engine that creates all of these things. They're more cultural issues and cultural lightning rods and everything else. And obviously that was used against Kamala in a very meaningful way. But what I'm here to tell you, and what you should know if you have been listening to any of my truth bombs the whole time, it's simply the destruction of the United States because we're now lawless. The law means nothing. The American Revolution, of which we're approaching the 250th anniversary, created liberty and justice for all in order to form a more perfect union. Now, I know those are platitudes, but based on the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and the law presumably being supreme based on separation of powers. That's called dynamism. And that's checks and balances, so that no one system can overrun the other, because that leads to tyranny. And what are we in the midst of? They've all collapsed around corruption. Corruption is the single most important issue to identify, and corruption isn't a catch-all where it's like, yeah, some people are taking favors, they're doing this or that. Maybe they played ball, but everybody plays ball. And you know what? You can't blame them, but our guy's better than the other guy. No, the law is the fucking law. Okay? Everything that Trump's done with crypto and this inside stuff against the Constitution by way of starting with, the insurrection, leading to crypto and all things emoluments clause and the 747 and this, that, and the other. I mean, it's like unbelievable that while he's collapsing the economy, while things are in such turmoil, while people got fired by the thousands in the federal government from, institutions that were so important, particularly in holding lawlessness to account, in the Department of Justice. This is a hostile takeover. This is the same shit that happened in mergers and acquisitions in the 80s and the 90s primarily with huge corporations, okay? That's what they've done to government, but to destroy the law. For whom? The Epstein Class. They're doing what? Endless wars for oil, huge prisons, this, that, and the other. Fascism, corporate fascism. I lay out here, you don't live in a democracy. You don't function as a capitalistic system. We don't have the law. We don't have separation of powers. Corruption rules and everything. Millions are beginning to understand the threat of Project 2025. The Clean New Deal is democracy's answer. Why? Because it has the details. It's not platitudes. And we need to get this into millions of people's minds so that they support this, that they march with this, that then we then fund this to candidates that are then going to ultimately run on the Clean New Deal against platitudes. And I think guys like, Nate and many others would come around in a nanosecond if the actual population were like, no, you're pissing on my head telling me it's rain. I don't want platitudes. You can't fix that. That issue is important to you, but unless you arrest the bad guys, unless you take Trump down, unless you have accountability for all of these guys, and until there's a mea culpa to where everybody understands the $71 trillion truth, that we circled the wagons and we didn't use Congress, which has the power of the purse, which we created this smoke and mirrors back in the 2008 great financial crisis through what was known as TARP, where they presented $700 billion to save the global economy. That was a drop in the bucket. That was a dog and pony show because we backdoored from the Federal Reserve at that time 29 trillion, which later became 33 trillion. Then we added 16 trillion in quantitative easing. Then we added 22 trillion before COVID for a repo run out of SoftBank of Japan. All of this isn't hyperbole, okay? This is all, we got the receipts, as they say, right? Cited everything else, know exactly who did what and when and how. And ironically, Bernie Sanders was the one who dominated the investigation with the Levy study that got this information that then he backed off from. He's always talked about 4 trillion. He's talked about this, that, and the other, but he hasn't made the correlation that, oh, there was a giant racketeering enterprise that our Department of Justice didn't hold accountable. So we gave tens of trillions of dollars to these guys because that was the Faustian bargain the Obama administration made. Okay. So the Democrats have been lying to you the whole time. They're liars. They're not the same level of the malignant narcissism and cancer of the Republican lies. But, lie by any other name is a lie. This is a revolution of truth. Do you understand? If you understand that we don't have to find the money, we already have the mechanisms because of our fiat currency with a global reserve currency for the moment, and appears to be that's what we're probably fighting for in Iran to a degree, to, I don't know what, plug up the BRICS countries. That's a whole nother conversation. Still trying to sort that out. But the long and the short of it is that you want Medicare for all, you want renewable energy, you want this, that, and the other. You start with the knowledge that they've stolen $71 trillion. Who's they? The Epstein class, which is the financial class. Can we put them in prison? I think so. I don't think there's a statute of limitations on fraud, just like there's not a statute of limitations on child rape. All of this stuff needs to come down. The Epstein class, completely. Okay? But we got to restore the law. But you can't restore the law when you're taking money from oligarchs. Now, is Bernie Sanders tied to oligarchs? No. He's found people to donate small amounts of money to give him a ginormous treasure chest to be able to, fund campaigns around the country. And that's their paradigm, to give you platitudes. They sound great, but they can't do anything unless everybody is electrified. And I really believe that we can actually electrify people who supported Trump that are now regretting Trump, that aren't really the most astute when it comes to politics, geopolitics, history, and all the rest of it. But they understand theft, and they understand when they're being stolen from, and they understand unfairness, especially when they're struggling as well. That's part and parcel to developing this notion that we have to reestablish the middle class by breaking away from fossil fuel, by creating a renewable energy paradigm, and a productive capacity is how you fund this stuff. We did it during Keynesian economics that led to World War II, because of after the Great Depression and everything that is involved with. It's kind of similar now. But at the same time, we have amazing resources. We have incredible technological power. We have incredible resources in universities and everything else. They're just being used to serve the billionaire class, the Epstein class, which is tyranny 101. Is it not? When you have 2 levels of law where people can rape with impunity little children, the grotesqueness of this is insane. But is it any different, quite frankly, than the Catholic Church covering up priests for probably a millennia? It's kind of the same thing. But at the same time, it just goes on, and it's the depravity of the wicked. And yet, if you're religious, what's the first words in the Bible? Let there be light. If you're not religious and you believe in the universe, the construct of cosmology and physics, what's the reality? The Big Bang. There's kind of an interesting composite corollary there, is there not? So what you have to understand is the precepts of the Clean New Deal are we got to get rid of qualified immunity. Police should not be able to shoot to kill without being held accountable. That's not to say the police shouldn't be able shoot bad guys. They should have shot a lot of people on January 6th. We have to end judicial immunity. What is SCOTUS doing by selling out the United States to give us this executive president who's a complete fucking fool? Are you kidding me? The billionaire class is just simply destroying the greatest experiment in history of the world for the same old wicked owners of mankind that have been there the whole time. New boss, same as the old boss. Tyranny 101. How do they do it? The Electoral College. The precepts of the Clean New Deal are briefly, we've got to create a new modern day Glass-Steagall Act to basically reveal that you can't gamble with other people's money and then make that backstopped by the House, which is the Fed, okay, which is what we did. You can't allow racketeers and grifters of mammoth, enormous proportions to steal everybody's money, to gamble on the margins, to make fees for the middlemen so that they can blow up the world. And then they can do it again and again and again and again and again. That's what they've done. A new Modern Glass-Steagall Act aligns interests, separates commercial banking from investment banking, holds people accountable, but says in the statutes, never again shall we allow, and this is what Dodd-Frank was supposed to remedy, and it never did because nobody understands the law, never allow the full faith and credit of the United States to be used to guarantee speculation, i.e. racketeering, in commodities markets. That's all about the money. Where are you going to find the money? Well, I've got $71 trillion for you, which is 71 trillion times or 70 trillion times larger than the net worth of the richest man on the planet. Do you want to pay attention to me? This is all backstopped in everything I have. Everything is cited. You just haven't heard it because the whole system is making sure you don't know how this works for themselves. That's a reason why there's a top 0.1%, and then the 1%, and then the top 10%. The top 10%, as long as their stocks and their real estate are through the roof, they don't give a fuck until it happens to them. Ask all the scientists and all of the lawyers that worked in tall building law firms that capitulated, that got booted out, and that don't have, or, scientists that worked, for 30 years with some sort of research designation that got destroyed by Doge. And now suddenly he's looking around like, what am I supposed to do? Okay. You can't live in your own private Idaho and, not care about anything until something happens to you, because when nothing means anything to you, you mean nothing. And the flip side of the new Glass-Steagall Act is we've got to create a new get rid of Citizens United. Nothing happens good with legal corruption or anything good in the shadows. They're lying to you. They're pissing on your head, telling you it's rain because you're a fool until you fricking wise up, which is the information I'm giving you. Because when you have the truth, you're bulletproof. And by the way, if you're older, when you have the truth, you're drinking from the fountain of youth. 3, we're going to demonstrate how $71 trillion was looted. That's a starting point. Yeah, you want affordable healthcare, you want affordable housing. I know how they both work, and I know how they work to your detriment because of the consolidation of these corporate empires and what their business models are and how they collect fees and they can destroy things, and then ultimately they're backstop. It's called socialism for the criminal class. We are not a democracy. We don't function as capitalists. I know everybody likes to say in-stage capitalism is a problem, gangster capitalists, this, that, and the other. Yeah, there's true. But when you reignite the law and you actually have teeth in the law, that doesn't happen. Bernie Sanders isn't talking about, holding these guys accountable. He's saying, oh, the country needs to be about more than just the billionaires. No, the country needs to be to take guys who've broken the law, that destroyed us, that betrayed us. They need to go to prison and have all their money yanked back. We don't need billionaires to finance this with their taxes, just so you know. We can fucking figure any of this shit out with 535 people in Congress united and basically redeeming the American dream, which is the clean new frickin' deal. And by the way, every seat in Congress is available and half the Senate is available. And most of them are hedged or controlled by somebody else, and they don't understand these issues, particularly young guys who haven't been around, who aren't speaking to it. You want to talk about the affordability crisis? You're not going to fix the affordability crisis if you don't understand control fraud, appraisal fraud, if you don't understand the nuances of guarantees and how this whole fucking system works. You're like a kid pretending like, okay, I'm going to go on an adventure and I'm going to figure out how the world works at what, like the age of 12? And you've got answers? No, you don't. You haven't been around the block. You don't know, you don't even know the first thing about what reality is that brought it to this moment where it has been in play literally for 70 years. John Birch Society, Jim Crow, all of these types of things were basically the control for power for the white supremacist class long ago, which merged with America's burgeoning corporate power. Okay. The North had the robber barons and the South had the Confederacy. And then everybody else fought against that for what? Ultimately, abolition. How about that? Which was the second revolution to basically do what Martin Luther King said, live true to what you put on paper. This has always been a battle of integrity, of liberty and justice for all, decency, integrity, and integrity versus complicity, duplicity, complicity, the light versus the dark. That's what that's all about. We don't have to worry about finding the money. We know exactly how to activate the money. We just have to get people with the information in Congress so that we can control the outcome. That's the only way you do it peacefully. Otherwise, you're going to have further and further erosion that's going to lead to people that go to, concentration camps. And if you know anything about, Hitler's Germany or Putin's Russia or Stalin's Russia, millions of people died in those conflicts. That's what's next if we don't get a hold of this. So the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh precepts of the Clean New Deal: get rid of qualified immunity, get rid of judicial immunity and executive presidency and the electoral college. Nobody should be above the law. And the system shouldn't be able to lie to the American people. That's what this is all about. Lies, 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 lies. This is a revolution of truth. And you can't be an idiot if you understand the system, okay? Which is what I'm giving you the breadcrumbs to be able to sort through this thing, which is the Rubik's Cube. And when you put all the pieces together, eureka. And then the final three pieces of the Clean New Deal, we've got to address the Supreme Court. We got to get 13 members of the Supreme Court on there to balance out the Roberts Court by any means necessary. And then we got to hold the Roberts Court accountable. Then we have to end insider trading. Yeah, Nate Bluin, said that. That's popular. Again, I always use this as an example. Marjorie Taylor Greene, because of her stance with the Epstein victims, has been someone that people are like, oh, wow, she's going against MAGA. She's kind of a hero. That's kind of what the mainstream press did because she was elected however many times. I think if you got to get elected twice every year, and she was there for 3 times, right? So the bottom line is that she comes in. I'm not sure what the salaries now are of representatives, elected representatives, but I think it's probably in $160,000 range. She made out with $27 million over the course of 6 years. Okay. No insider trading. And also we got to have term limits because look at the likes of Chuck Schumer. That guy, not by my cold, dead hands, and everything that goes with everybody who's anti-Chuck Schumer. The bottom line is the DNC, the billionaire revolving door, the corruption is what has destroyed us. We're not dealing like let's just go into Obama's reign in 2007. I think everybody saw Obama come in, say, hope and change we can believe in. We're going to get rid of the, special interest was always the thing, right? And they're not going to have access to the White House. That lasted for like 60 days, okay? It's always about the influence of who's in control with the money. And we have basically put so much, shall we say, authority in the economists and those that are, the so-called independents of the Federal Reserve. There's this thing recently between, Donald Trump trying to subpoena with Janine Pirro, Jerome Powell, who is the Federal Reserve chairman, as if, he was up to something, overextending, and because the only way that they can fire him is for cause, like something that he did crazy, like went nuts on the rebuild of the Federal Reserve or the redesign or whatever they did by modernizing it or updating it or whatever they felt, right? That he's solely responsible for whatever that is that Trump is taking issue with. This, in the meantime, I think he raised $350 million for his own private ballroom, which might be a literal bunker, as far as we can tell, among other weird things that have been going on. The The ludicrousness is insane. We're on ludicrous speed, like Spaceballs, of the worst satire of the Mad magazine, Mad King, in a time what is literally potentially World War III. But it's the end of empire. It's the end of the United States as we know it, which also, if we lose the world's exorbitant privilege as the world's reserve currency, we can't finance our way out of this. We'll be like every other country that has to, I don't know, kind of be in a paramilitary junta, drug embroiled, dark economy, shadow economy kind of thing, like we've seen throughout all of the corrupt countries in South America my whole lifetime. And by the way, they were the petri dish for all things libertarianism, i.e., Friedman, and this whole thing that led to Project 2025. It's the billionaire class, it's tyranny 101. They're all lying to you, and the only way to break the grip is with the details. Look, guys, there's a lot of good people out there that are going to be running for office that don't have all of this information. You need to help me get this to everybody that's running for Congress. Facilitate dialogue. I will, welcome them on my podcast. I need to grow these numbers. I mean, my numbers are growing slightly, but I need to reach millions of people. Millions of people. It's got to take a critical mass of people listening to me going, dude, have you heard this guy, Patrick Lovell? This guy has got the information that can turn this whole disaster on its head. Why? Because I've been in the trenches the whole time and I did the work. Again, I did a documentary, 413 Waking Up the American Dream. I did this long form series called The Con that did what the entire federal government of the United States couldn't do because of revolving door corruption, and what media didn't do because media is a bunch of freaking amateurs. They're idiots. This isn't Walter Cronkite, time period with Edward Murrow and real journalists, and then obviously all of the gonzo stuff that would follow. There was a pursuit of truth in the United States for most of my lifetime, even though there was all sorts of demented battles for power and this, that, and the other. It's always been a mixed bag. Okay. But you know what? As a result of all of that stuff, we've allowed the liars to gain way too much control. And now it's like you're sitting on the aircraft where they hijack the plane and they're flying you into a world or into the Twin Towers. What are you going to do? It is that moment. Okay. The long and the short of it is this world is going into a really dark place if we don't become united in truth. Where me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity, decency, sustainability, equality, opportunity, beauty, and we merge in unity behind the Clean New Deal to purge the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility. Can you think of anything more important on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution? I can't. But the only way that happens is if you become a nuclear reaction back to the Big Bang of truth. Why do I use that analogy? What is the Big Bang? What is energy? What is the supernova? It's just what forces light into darkness, which is what we got to do. And that's been this whole mission that I've been on the whole time. And yeah, it's like pushing a giant boulder up to the top of the mountain. But if millions of us get together behind it, it's a lot easier to push this truth over. And once it goes on the other side, it will become the biggest bowling ball in history to wipe out the penheads of corruption and, quite frankly, fascism, because corruption burrs and fuels fascism. And lastly, and I didn't say this before, I said we're not a democracy. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy, which is now fooling fascism, which is socialism for criminals. How's that for irony? If you can follow the bouncing ball, then you're somebody who should join on the Clean New Deal. Join us, like us, share, reach out, become a volunteer. We've got to force this through this madness. I'll be at No Kings. I hope you will be too. And I look forward to your feedback. Thank you so much for listening. Onwards and upwards.